And thank you all for coming out in the afternoon. I'm so proud of the business school coming up now with a Global Green MBA program. I think that's fantastic. So I'm going to talk this afternoon about my new book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded. And for those of you who can't read it, I will read it for you. It says, German engineering, Swiss innovation, American nothing. Somebody actually thought that the best way to advertise their product in South Africa was to advertise that it had German engineering, Swiss innovation, American nothing. Fortunately, after 9/11, we went from red to code red. And this book is about how we go from red to code green. We need to go to code green because the world is getting hot, flat, and crowded. What do I mean by that? Well, hot, that's very simple. That's global warming. The fact that global average temperatures have risen almost 1 degree centigrade since 1750, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Almost, well, a degree and a half roughly Fahrenheit, heading for 2 degrees. That's what hot means. Now I know what you're thinking. I've given this talk before. You're thinking, you mean, Mr. Friedman, all this Al Gore stuff is about just 2 degrees Fahrenheit? All this Al Gore stuff about just 2 degrees? That's right, because you know the global climate system is a lot like your body. If your temperature goes from 98.6 to 100.6, you don't feel so good. And if you go from 100.6 to 102.6, you go to the hospital. So does the planet. Very small changes in global average temperature can have huge disruptive climactic effects. We'll talk about that a little more in a second. Flat's just my metaphor for the rise of middle classes all over the world who can increasingly compete, connect, and collaborate, plug and play like Americans. Middle classes from China to India, from Russia to Brazil. Friends, there are too many Americans today. There are too many Americans. The good Lord did not design this planet for this many Americans. And if we, the original Americans, don't redefine what it means to be an American and create the tools that will allow so many people to be Americans, we're going to burn up, choke up, heat up, and smoke up this planet, not to mention eat up this planet, even faster than Al Gore predicts. That's what flat's about. Crowded? Crowded's population growth. We're in the year 2008. By the year 2020, there's going to be, early 2020s, another billion, that's billion with a B, billion people on the planet in the next 12 years. You know, if you go to Google and you put your birthday in and hit I'm feeling lucky, you can actually find out how many people were on the planet the year you were born. So I was born July 20, 1953. I put that into Google, hit I'm feeling lucky, and it told me there were 2.681 billion people on the planet the year I was born. There are now 6.2 billion. And then if you go to the UN population website, you can actually see how many people will be here if you live to be 100. So if I keep working out and eating yogurt and live to be 100, the UN population site tells me that by the year 2053, there will be 9.2 billion people on the planet. That means in my lifetime alone, the population of the planet will more than triple, and there will be more people here, born here, between now and when I die, than were here when I arrived. The world is getting hot, flat, and crowded. Now, the simple argument of this book is that hot, flat, and crowded were like three flames that converged right around the millennium to create a raging fire. And this fire is now driving 5 huge global trends. So these 5 trends, I believe, how we face, manage, and diffuse them is going to be the ballgame, is going to determine basically the stability or instability of the planet in the 21st century. And let me go through them with you for a few minutes. The first is energy and natural resources supply and demand. That's the rising prices of everything from food to fuel to cement to steel in a world that's hot, flat, and crowded. My friend Tom Burke, who runs an environmental NGO over in England, he's created a new unit of measure. He calls it the Americum. And an Americum is any 300 million people living like Americans. Okay? Now, when I came of age in the 1950s, there were 2.5 Americums in the world. America, Western Europe, and Japan. Today, there are 9 Americums in the world. There's one in America, one in Western Europe, one in Eastern Europe and Russia, one in India, giving birth to another, one in China, giving birth to another, one in South America, one in East Asia. We've gone, in the last 20 years or so, from a world of 2.5 Americums, units of 300 million people living like Americans, to a world of 9 Americums. And the energy and natural resource supply and demand implications of that will be enormous. Second mega problem is something I call petro-dictatorship. That's the rise of Russia, Venezuela, Iran, all these states that are almost totally dependent on oil for their GDP. And I've been thinking about this issue for a long time, and I created something I call the first law of petropolitics. And to illustrate the implications of this in a world that's hot, flat, and crowded. What I did was, it started on the back of a napkin, I graphed the average OPEC price from 1979 until 2006. And that's the thick black line at the bottom. And if you graph the average OPEC price from 79 to 2006, it looks like a V. Rough numbers, $80.79, $16.95, actually got down to $10 around 1991. 1991. What happened in 1991 when oil hit $10 a barrel? Why, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Must have been a coincidence. Okay, so down there, $16, 1995. Then back up in 2005 to $80. So it looks like a V. Then I went to Freedom House, and Freedom House does a freedom index. And I got their freedom index for 4 countries, 4 petrolist states almost totally dependent on oil for their GDP. Now, their freedom index measures free and fair elections, new parties and unions allowed to be formed, women's groups and NGOs, magazines and newspapers opened or closed. They call it the Freedom Index. I got their Freedom Index for Iran, Nigeria, Russia, and Venezuela. And all I did was, just for the heck of it, I took the Freedom House Freedom Index and laid it on the price of oil. And darn, it's the top line, the light gray line, if it doesn't look like that. I actually break each one down in the book. Well, isn't that interesting? That would suggest that the price of oil and the pace of freedom operate in an inverse correlation in petrolist states. As the price of oil goes down, the pace of freedom goes up. And as the price of oil goes up, the pace of freedom goes down. I call that the first law of petropolitics. Now, you don't need my little graph to tell you this, because you know it. Last problem is biodiversity.